What is going on, everybody? Welcome to what just might be the best time around on this channel, the kickoff to my summer deep dive series. Probably the piece of content that I am most proud of here on this channel, going team by team, previewing every team in order of my power rankings, going through off-season changes, the coaching staff, the scheme, the players, you name it, and ranking and stacking up how all of those things compare to the rest of the league. It is really good to be here today, launching the series with the Washington Commanders. Sorry, Commanders fans, it had to be somebody at the bottom, but this is a fun young team that just with all of the turnover, the new quarterback, the new staff, just really everything to prove heading into next year, but should be a really fun episode here. Before we do get started, I do ask if you could take just a second to hit that like button. This series is really everything for me this summer. Every episode takes about 25 hours to produce. You'll be getting 40 plus hours of free content diving thoroughly into the entire National Football League here. So it would really go a long way if everyone hit that like button. Like, it could double the amount of eyes that this video gets in front of here, which would mean so much to me. So please, if you could just take a second. I know I sound desperate, but it's like, man, it's such an easy thing that really does help. So if you could take just a second to show your support for the series there by hitting that like button down below. And of course, make sure you're subscribed because we've got 31 more of these bad boys coming. You're not going to want to miss any of them, so hit that subscribe down below. But without further ado, let's get started with our first deep dive of the summer here. And basically, because this is the first episode here, I'll kind of go through the order of operations so that you can understand kind of how this works. First, we go through the off-season changes, position group by position group, who they lost, who they added, and then a little kind of note on if that position group or the coaching staff or whatever it may be was upgraded or downgraded or to be determined or stayed the same, etc., etc. Then we get into the coaching staff, breaking down these guys' backgrounds, what their coaching trees are, and what types of schemes we can expect to see from these guys. Then we get into the good stuff, going through player by player, position group by position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. We also have added some bonus special team analysis this year. I've come up with kind of a nice formula that you'll see later in the video to kind of rank these special teams a little bit better than I've done in the past. Then we'll get a kind of recap on the team's strengths and weaknesses, take a look at their schedule, their Vegas over-under, and ultimately kind of what their win total projection is for the season. So it really is a thorough look at these teams. Let's get started here, Commanders fans, who I mentioned had a very, very busy offseason, maybe as much turnover as any team in the league. That's going to start here with the coaching staff and even all the way up to the front office that we don't really have room to talk about too much in this series. But even Adam Peters, the new general manager, added here. But yeah, complete overhaul with the coaching staff. Obviously, the head coach, Ron Rivera, asked to leave here. Things definitely flamed out with Riverboat Ron. Don't need to get into that, but Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, on the outs. Jack Del Rio, the defensive coordinator, was fired mid last season. Even down to the special teams coordinators, Nate Kazor is going to be replaced by Larry Izzo. But coming in, you got Dan Quinn, the hire from Dallas there, the defensive coordinator, now his second stint as a head coach, and then another former head coach, Cliff Kingsbury, going to be running the offense there. Going to have a lot to talk about with that and how that might look here. And then Joe Witt, who spent a lot of time in Green Bay under some questionable defensive coordinators, coming from a Packers fan, speaking from experience, but not really Joe Witt's fault. He's gone on and kind of developed under Dan Quinn over the last 3-4 years. He's going to be the de facto defensive coordinator kind of under Dan Quinn. So based on what Ron Rivera had turned into in recent years, it's easy to say this was at least slightly upgraded. I have my questions about Dan Quinn, but I do think he'll do a better job than Ron Rivera had been doing the last couple of years. But then you get into the players here. The quarterback, obviously seeing some turnover. They traded Sam Howell to Seattle. Jacoby Brissett, who came in at the end of last year after this team had kind of seen enough of Sam Howell, he's going to head north or west or east. I don't know. My geography sucks, but he's going down the highway, whichever direction in New England. And then coming in is Jaden Daniels, the number 2 overall pick. We obviously will have a lot to talk about with him, but with obviously watching a lot of film on this team, getting ready for this series, Sam Howell was even worse than I thought, and it's going to be hard for Jaden Daniels to be worse than that. So as a starting point, we'll go slightly upgraded, and then, of course, the hope is that will be a massive upgrade over time. And then Mariota is going to come in as the backup. Running back, this might ruffle some feathers from Commanders fans. I left this as neutral, losing Antonio Gibson, heading to New England as well, and bringing in Austin Eckler. Look, Eckler's 30, didn't have a lot of juice left. Antonio Gibson was one of the better receiving backs in the league last year. So by name, this is an upgrade, but I'm not fully convinced that that's an upgrade in the running back room. Then you go to tight end. This one's very much to be determined. You kind of bring in the skeleton of Zach Ertz to reunite with Cliff Kingsbury, and then Ben Sinnott, the second-round tight end, is very much kind of a potential pick, someone I liked. But Logan Thomas has been an adequate piece for them. So, to be determined on if they upgraded at tight end. Certainly potential there to upgrade, no doubt. Wide receiver, I think this is pretty easy. Slightly downgraded. They lose Curtis Samuel, who took a pretty sizable contract with the Buffalo Bills. They're going to bring in a couple of slot replacements there. Alemedy Zaccheaus and Luke McCaffrey in the 3rd round. Going to be tough for those guys to give you everything Curtis Samuel did from the slot there. And then on the offensive line, I have this as slightly downgraded as well. Nothing horribly downgraded, but arguably the best piece on this O-line, not back as of this moment, Charles Leno. He's famously a guy that whoever he's playing for, their fans kind of hate the guy because when he loses kind of ugly. But you look at the full picture, he's a very steady left tackle, and they're going to be relying on a veteran Cornelius Lucas and Brandon Coleman, a 3rd-round pick there. Going to open up some major questions at left tackle there. That's the key reason for the slight downgrade. Even if the interior of the offensive line is hopefully going to be improved, bringing in guys like Tyler Biadasz, Nick Allegretti, some veterans there to replace guys like Nick Gates and Chris Paul, who's still on the roster, who will be taking a seat now. Tyler Larson played about 40% of their snaps. The interior is upgraded, but the tackle situation's in a worse spot. And then this team's also getting Braden Daniels back, who they spent a 4th-round pick on. Good luck keeping your Braden and Jaden Daniels straight this year. But was kind of a draft and develop 4th-round type of guy. You don't want to just forget about him. He missed his entire rookie season, so he's getting into the mix there too. Overall, still the massive questions at left tackle. Leave it as a slight downgrade for me. It's obviously a very critical position on the O-line. As for the defense, I think from a roster perspective, much more clear upgrades, I would say. On the interior defensive line, obviously upgraded there. You add the talented Johnny Jerzon Newton. I still haven't gotten a great answer on if we're supposed to call him Johnny or Jerzon, but I thought he was a 1st-round caliber player. They bring him into the mix. We are going to have some new injury news to discuss when we get to his breakdown there, but interior D-line very easily upgraded. Edge, this one is murky because obviously Montez Sweat and Chase Young were traded away mid-season last year. Both those guys played about a 1/3 of the season there. So is the additions of Dorrance Armstrong, Frankie Louvu going to be a little bit of a hybrid guy? Journeyman, Cleveland Farrell, Dante Fowler, 7th-round pick, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. None of these are massive influxes of talent, but certainly better than what they were left with after, Sweat and Chase Young left, but still kind of hard to say if we're just saying last year's team versus this year's team, is this group better than, 8 weeks of Montez Sweat and Chase Young? Again, pretty hard to say there. Obviously an upgrade from the second half Commanders for sure. Then you get to linebacker, definitely upgraded for me. You lose Cody Barton, who was a Band-Aid for them. Khaleke Hudson did pop for me on film. He heads to the Saints. They didn't bring him back. And then David Mayo, another journeyman veteran there. But, pretty, some losses that are pretty easy to stomach there as you bring in the talented Frankie Louvu, who's going to play all over the formation. Bobby Wagner still has a little bit of run defense juice left in the tank. And then I even list Jeremy Chin as part of the linebacking crop. I definitely expect he'll be used in that kind of bandit safety dime linebacker role a lot of the times with his size profile, so helping out the linebacker coverage group a little bit there. And then they even spent a 5th-round pick on a developmental guy in Jordan McGee. So definite upgrades in the linebacker room. Cornerback, however, they're going to have to replace Kendall Fuller, who's been a mainstay as their number 1 corner. They also lost Danny Johnson, who played about 20% of their snaps, whatever. But they bring in the veteran Michael Davis, who's not trending in the right direction, and then 2nd-round pick Mike Sainristil. That is a downgraded position for now. That's pretty hard to argue with. And then with the safety group as well, slightly downgraded. They lose Cameron Curl, who's been a very solid safety for them. They did sign Jeremy Chin, who will be, I think, a part of the safety room and the linebacker room, hoping to kind of rekindle his career. It's been a rough couple years in Carolina, but he's not an automatic upgrade to Cam Curl. And then they spent a 5th-round pick on Dominique Hampton there as well. One thing I didn't note down there, though, that is going to be considered later is Jatavis Martin, their 2nd-round pick last year, should be sliding back into that safety room. At least that's what I would expect after playing more slot corner for them last year. And they just drafted Mikey Sainristil in the 2nd round. But yeah, slightly downgraded at safety. And then the special teams slightly upgraded, going from Joey Sly, who really struggled last year, to Brandon McManus. Yeah, slightly upgraded. Nothing crazy there, but should be better from the kicking point of view for the Commanders. So lots and lots of turnover, as we mentioned. Certainly going to add a lot of volatility to this team's season, and they're hoping it's going to be volatility in the right direction. All right, so the next order of business is to dive into the coaching staff and really what they're going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball, and ranking these guys. Now, Dan Quinn steps in as the head coach. He's a retread head coach. And this year, I'm not going to bother with ranking the first-year head coaches. That just seems kind of silly to me. It's nuanced enough that I think we can understand just saying not ranked for these new guys. Let's see what they can do. And with Dan Quinn, I feel like you could rank retread head coaches based on what they've done in the past. But with Dan Quinn, it's like this really feels rejuvenating for him because he is so far removed from the guy he was in Atlanta, where in Atlanta I felt like he really tried to replicate the Seattle cover 3 system. And you just can't really do that when you don't have Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Bobby. Well, he does have Bobby Wagner now, to be fair, but not the same Bobby Wagner. And all that talent that Seattle 3 defense had. Not to mention the league caught up to how to beat cover 3. So he goes to Dallas and just blew me away with how he innovated his front. He took, I think, a lot of different influences and has kind of built his own system. It's a copycat league. A lot of teams are running the same stuff, and surely other teams have stolen what Dallas is doing, but he didn't go to Dallas and be like, oh, I'll copy the Fangio stuff or, whatever. He kind of hybridized his own system, and it has really had a lot of success in Dallas. There's no way around it. So I don't look at him as the same head coach that was in Atlanta, right? So I'm excited to see him kind of get this second opportunity. I think he's more than earned it with what he's done in Dallas. And I mean, you look at his background, started with Jim Mora, Nick Saban in Miami, Eric Mangini. Then you have the Seattle stuff with Gus Bradley and the Seattle 3 defense. And then just himself. He's been a defensive coordinator or higher over the last 10 years. You can see where he was able to kind of just take a back seat, build a new scheme for the more modern NFL and why it might work. He's coached every defense in the book to this point. So you can see how those coaching influences have allowed him to do that. And then as far as what the scheme is now, it's kind of a 4-2 front, a multiple front, where you're going to have some hybrid edge backers. You're going to have guys putting their hand in the dirt, moving guys all over the front, really. A decent amount of blitzing, but a ton of stunts and running those kind of crosses and games up front to scheme guys open. He's really good at showing blitzes so that he can isolate, certain guys to get those one-on-one opportunities. So really good at manufacturing pressure up front. And then on the back end, you do see a lot of those Seattle ties in terms of a lot of single high stuff, but it's a lot more cover one than it ever was when he was coaching in Atlanta or Seattle. Dallas has been in the top 5 in terms of the most cover one called in the NFL over the last couple of years. And I would be a little surprised if he got off of that, though he doesn't have the corners that he had in Dallas to do that here in Washington. So he might go back to his cover 3 roots a little bit to start. Something to keep an eye on there, but definitely expect a lot of single high structure. And one thing we didn't mention is the use of that bandit linebacker role that he obviously has taken the influence of having Cam Chancellor with Seattle. We've seen that really develop through the Keanu Neal failures in Atlanta into now what they do with guys like Jaron Kearse in Dallas. And that, to me, is the Jeremy Chin signing in a nutshell, was him handpicking him to be that kind of dime linebacker, box safety type, with kind of 3 safety packages out there, whether that's in dime or nickel. So really multiple type of defense, and excited to see him kind of rebuild another defense in his vision here for Washington. And this is a good time to point out, I've made a big adjustment to the series this year. You're going to see a lot more kind of letter grading on this stuff. Those are your tiers in terms of how these guys are split up. I'll mention that a little bit more when we get to the player grades and stuff there. But the pass defense coaching is a major strength for this team. B+ ranking for them, which is going to go from 7th to 17th. There's a lot of good defensive coordinators in the league right now. And Dan Quinn alone is like an A- to an A, but anytime you're, rebuilding a staff, it's not just Dan Quinn's coaching, it's the culture and the staff and the communication and, the chemistry. More often than not, these guys don't just pick up right where they left off as like this elite staff. He can build it back up over time. But in terms of the run defense coaching, they've left a little bit more to be desired in Dallas. It's not that I don't think Dan Quinn understands how to defend the run game. I think it's slightly a bit more of just a preference to be a little more of that pass happy defense, play a little bit lighter up front. So it's more of a style of choice than it is, anything against Dan Quinn. But I think that needs to be reflected that Dallas's run defense hasn't exactly been what got Dan Quinn this job. So B- for run defense coaching. And then we didn't really mention Joe Witt. He's an extension of Dan Quinn here. Excited to see him get this promotion. Got really no bad words to say about him. But let's talk about Cliff Kingsbury. Obviously a big part of this picture. Basically the offensive head coach here. And I actually am higher on this hiring than a lot of people. A lot of people kind of laughed when Cliff got this job because he did such a bad job in Arizona, right? And context is important here, right? Like, is Cliff Kingsbury an amazing offensive coordinator? No. But you got to understand, like, there just aren't many great offensive coordinator options just sitting out there on the street, right? That's just not how the NFL works, right? Like, if you're even a good offensive coordinator, you're getting that head coaching job. So, and you're certainly in the league as an offensive coordinator and haven't been fired if you haven't been promoted to a head coach yet. So you're looking at the available crop and it's like, Cliff Kingsbury, Arthur Smith, like, I was higher on this hire in the sense of like, this was probably about as good as they could have done. Cliff had his issues in Arizona. He tried to build a Big 12 team in the NFL. They were soft, squishy, and scared and stupid a lot of the times, and in terms of how that team was constructed. But the roster construction is out of Cliff's hands. Now he can focus on just designing the offense. And I think in terms of what was available to them, this was about as good as they could have done. And I actually think in terms of the run game design from Cliff Kingsbury, when he had Kyler Murray, he actually showed a lot of really innovative, cool stuff with read options and, just not even option stuff, but just running pin and pull with the quarterback or speed options to the outside. Lots of different stuff to create that numbers advantage with your quarterback. And obviously having Jaden Daniels here, that influence is going to be there. So I'm actually pretty damn optimistic from the run game side of things. I thought it was coordinated very well from Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona. Passing game wise, a lot more to be desired. So that's where you're going to talk about the air raid offense being Cliff Kingsbury's bread and butter. I mean, I do want to plug a book that I read over the summer called The Perfect Pass. And if you're looking for some good summer football reading, it's all about Hal Mumme, the air raid offense, the evolution of the passing game in the 80s and 90s. Incredible read. Easily my favorite football book to date. And it gives you a better understanding of kind of what the air raid means and some of the concepts as well that you're going to be still seeing alive here today in this offense. But air raid probably gets a bad rap at this point. I think it's the negative aspects of the air raid at this point that have shown in the NFL. It's more about what we talked about, like Cliff Kingsbury over investing in speed and wideouts and not paying attention to the physical demands of building a team in the NFL. I think there's a philosophy with the air raid that has some issues. But the concepts in terms of Y cross and mesh and kind of spreading 2x2, just the 2x2 spread formation, like you'll see that in every single NFL game today. Like that's what the air raid goes back to. All those concepts, especially mesh, every team runs that stuff. Everybody runs air raid concepts. Now Cliff might crank that knob up from two times a game you're running mesh to 3 or 4 times a game you're running mesh. But it's a little bit overstated, like, oh, Cliff tried to run the air raid in the NFL and it didn't work. Not really. But I do think slight lack of innovation, slight stagmatism, I believe is a word in the English dictionary. Cliff's offense was stagnant in the sense of not so much using as much motion and keying things off, making things easier on the quarterback that way. Much more just, again, stagnant. Like, here's your offense, read it out, make it happen. You want to see more of that from Cliff, which is something modern coordinators are doing so well, using that motion to, make things easier on the offense. So maybe Cliff learned some of that, maybe he didn't. But definitely a lot more to prove in terms of the pass game coaching from Cliff. And then you kind of have that overall coach and culture ranking. That acts as your benefit of the doubt slider. It doesn't play a overwhelming role in the overall rankings and the formula, which, by the way, the whole formula for all this is in the description below. There's a whole method to the madness here with this series that's not even really worth getting into right now. But the coaching culture is kind of your benefit of the doubt slider. And needless to say, Washington just has a lot to prove. They haven't had a great culture. They haven't earned a lot of benefit of the doubt. They need to develop that chemistry from coaches to front office to players, that synergy that teams like the Chiefs and the Ravens and all the great organizations have. It really matters to a degree. So from Washington's perspective, with all this turnover, they've just got a lot of work to do. It's nothing against the guys in charge right now. It's more of just where they're at in terms of their coaching culture. So it's a relatively strong staff. I'm not going to sit here and pound the table and be like, oh my God, I can't believe they found Dan Quinn, right? Like, I do think they wanted to go the route of the young offensive mind and Ben Johnson to pair with the young quarterback. That's kind of the wave, the higher upside projection to get the offensive coach in there. And I'm always going to lean towards having an offensive coach. But at the same time, a guy like Cliff Kingsbury is kind of the perfect complement to a Dan Quinn. If you had to go to the defensive head coach route, to get a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, who nobody is going to steal from you to be their head coach anytime soon because of some of his other deficiencies that he showed as a head coach, I think they sort of, I hate to put it this way, but kind of rebounded well from the Dan Quinn hire that I was like, it's kind of a meh hire. But again, I think this is a capable staff that has everything in front of them here. And there's nobody I look at here in charge that says this group can't get the job done and turn this team into a contender someday. They just have to prove that this is the group together that can do that. I'd like to take a minute here real quick just to thank the sponsors for this video, Underdog Fantasy, who have agreed to sponsor the deep dive series to help bring this to you guys here. I just love Underdog, man. They've been a great company to work with here. They've been really good with me internally, but also I use Underdog Fantasy daily. Their pick'em contests are incredible. As someone that goes to a lot of Twins games, it just helps me stay glued to my seat, invested in the 7th inning, 8-spot hitter, see if he's going to get that single that I need him to hit my pick'em slip for the week. They've also got golf competitions right now. Really no better way to enjoy watching some links over the weekend, picking a couple golfers and seeing if they're going to have good or bad weekends in terms of higher or lower on the amount of strokes that they need to hit. You're stringing these picks together and you can get massive payouts over, 20 times what you put in, and these are, small entries that can give you those big payouts and really keep you invested. So even when you lose, feels like you're winning. They've also got best ball right now. So if you want to take what we're talking about in these deep dive series and get an edge in those best ball drafts for the NFL, take some of those sleepers we're talking about in this series, you can get involved over there. You can draft right now at Underdog Fantasy. So there's so many ways to play. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG, you can get up to a $250 bonus match. Crazy extra money there for those competitions. And you'll support my channel and this series in the process. So that's all available over at Underdog Fantasy, promo code TFG. Or just hit that QR code on your screen right now. And let's get back to the deep dive. But now it's time to get into the real meat and bones of this video, the roster breakdown. We're going to go through all the players, all the position groups, how they rank and stack up against the rest of the league. Before we get started with that, because this is the first episode of the series, I have made a change to how we are going to present this a little bit compared to years past. And that is, with the exception of the quarterback rankings, you will now see all of the position group rankings in the form of a letter grade, A, B, C+, whatever it might be. As opposed to in years past, we've had it as O-line 78.6 or 82.3 or whatever. There's a variety of reasons why I'm making this change. Number one, it's a quality of life thing for me, not to have to really obsess about, team 16 is a 77.6, whereas team 15 is a 77.7, It's also just not a very realistic approach. These teams are much more coming in with these groups in tier rankings, which is more of what this is going to look like with the letter grades. But I also think the letter grades just show you a little bit more of how the group actually looks. A lot of people I think see the number and they don't really know what that means. I think the letter grade will actually help translate a little better of where these groups stack up and where they might need to improve on the roster. So it's a big change. I know some will miss the letter grades and the exact rankings of one team is 16, one team is 17. You'll still get those ranks, but they're going to be more in clusters, which again, I think is a more realistic way to look at these position groups anyway. You will still be getting, though, the individual player grades. So don't worry, those aren't going anywhere. I know those are a fan favorite of the people that have been around the series. And then one more thing, I know it's a lot. Thank you for hearing me out. Again, first video, I got to address all these things because there will be comments about it. With these quarterback rankings here, I want to emphasize this. This is the passing game outlook. And there are a variety of quarterbacks in the league that a big part of the value they bring to the table is with their legs as a runner in the designed QB run game. And when you typically do your, quarterback rankings, your tier maker lists, guys like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, that's all factored in those types of lists, Whereas in this exercise, we're actually able to separate those things. Look at how the quarterback impacts the passing game and how the quarterback impacts the run game. So if you see guys maybe like a Hurts or a Daniels in these quarterback rankings and it looks lower than you typically see those quarterbacks, I ask you consider how much their impact on the run game is impacting the team as a whole in this exercise, and apply those two things together to understand what that quarterback is really bringing to the table for the team. So some added nuance there, but I want to clarify that as we get started. But without further ado, let's talk about Jayden Daniels, who, I'm sorry, Commanders fans, is going to come in with the lowest passing impact grade for the quarterbacks for this season. And, it's funny. We turned the page to the deep dive series, but we got to take a U-turn straight back to where we came from with the first player we talk about here, going back to the NFL draft, where we're obviously fresh off of my Jayden Daniels analysis, where I did not shy back from kind of planting my flag and saying, I think the Commanders made a mistake. I think they should have taken Drake May, who I think was the younger, less flawed, more physically gifted, honestly, when you factor in the size and especially the arm talent. I thought he was a better quarterback prospect. I was very surprised that they ultimately landed on Jayden Daniels. Now, we don't have to rehash those points and complain about this not being Drake May. That decision's been made. Now we can analyze the player and talk about how this could work out for the Washington Commanders. And, maybe in another year where Drake May doesn't exist, I don't even have those negative points to say about Jayden Daniels, but I did see some pretty significant flaws when I watched him as a prospect. I'll get to those, but I want to start on a positive note here with our first player. Jayden Daniels has a lot of talent, wins the Heisman Trophy. He's an electric runner. He throws a beautiful deep ball. He's got real strengths in there as a quarterback, strengths that speak for themselves, that can lead him to being a good to great quarterback in the league. And on top of his physical talents, I think honestly the biggest selling point on him, and maybe was what really sold the Commanders on him, is the guy, the human here in Jayden Daniels, who proved throughout a 5-year college career, like he's got that work ethic, that desire, the football character that you look for. Every quarterback, no matter how talented they are, needs to get to the NFL and continue to improve. And I think Jayden Daniels has shown, his process, his ability to identify weaknesses in his game in the offseason, improve year by year as a quarterback, was evident going back to his time at Arizona State, where he was just kind of a sporadic, run around backyard football type of quarterback. Gets to LSU, and in the first year, did a much better job playing on structure, limiting the turnovers, very much a game manager type of dude. Was viewed as, okay, maybe if he has another good year, he could sneak in as a 4th round pick in the 2024 NFL draft. But then in that final season at LSU, really settled in, got more comfortable with the offense, with himself as a player, and started to push the ball downfield and show off that he throws a beautiful football. He's got great touch. He's got great accuracy. Did such an incredible job of maximizing the incredible roster talent he had around him at LSU. And that combination of the desire to be great paired with, real tangible results of improving things that you need to work on, that stuff translates to the league. So there's definitely an arrow pointing up on him, and continued growth is expected. The last nice thing I want to say about Jayden Daniels before we talk about some of his weaknesses is I felt like his kind of pocket presence and the way he's able to sense pressure and manage that pocket, feel the rush, step up, buy time within the pocket, and then know when to get out of the pocket as well and use his feet, has become a very dangerous point of his game. Whereas you go back to Arizona State and he was much more like, I don't want to just say first read and run, but he was running a lot, whereas now he is able to use that pocket much better. So and know when to take off and use his feet much better. So that's another feather in his cap. But even a part of that strength in that he is really effective at knowing when to scramble and break the structure of the play. This is a good transition to more of my concerns on Jayden Daniels. Even if he's great at knowing when to scramble, he is really not great at all at throwing in scramble drill. He's very much that tuck and run style. He wants to use his feet. He wants to create those electric runs. And oftentimes he can, but a lot of plays, he's picking up 15, 20 yards on the ground, whereas if he just kept his head up and kept that posture ready to throw and saw the field on the move, he could have just thrown it to a wide open wide receiver that could have been those 20 yards and some. So he leaves a lot of meat on the bones in scramble drill, really by looking to run. And that's where with like Drake May, it's like, yeah, he's not able to, weave through the defense for 40 yards, but way more consistently, he's breaking out of the pocket and making these crazy throws on the run that are way more translatable to the league. So that's something I need to see improvement from Jayden Daniels, is when he starts to scramble, can he see the field and have the arm to accurately get the ball to these guys? But the biggest really knock that I had on Jayden Daniels that I just think he absolutely has to improve upon in the league is the ability to target the middle of the field. And every time I say that, I get Daniels defenders and Washington Commanders fans saying, throwing clips at me of one or two times where he throws a dig. And it's like, see, he throws the middle of the field. Of course he does. Every quarterback will inevitably throw a dig over the course of a season. But I'm talking about game by game, watching his film. You do see very consistently he's surveying the field and just not seeing open receivers over the middle, whether it's glossing over guys or being quite late while throwing a lot of those digs and intermediate routes. So he's either passing up open throwing windows, which again, sometimes he'll take off and run and pick up 20 yards, but it's like, if you just saw the guy running the 20-yard inbreaker and threw it to him, you could have saved your energy and, maybe avoided a hit in the process. So got to improve there. But even when he did see it, a lot of times he's really late where the receiver's already begun his break, the safety's crashing down, and it's leading his wide receivers to getting crushed while they're catching it, leading to incompletions. And I think in the NFL, which is something Bryce Young learned week 1 against the Falcons with Jesse Bates, picked him off on 2 of these routes. In the NFL, instead of that safety, getting there on arrival of the ball, he's a step ahead of the ball, picking it off, taking it back the other way. And I'm worried that you're going to see more of that with Jayden Daniels if he can't speed up his anticipation and how well he sees the intermediate part of the field, particularly in a Cliff Kingsbury offense, where the core aspects of the air raid offense are Y-cross and mesh, where reading out the middle of the field and knowing how to high-low is a critical aspect of that system. And that was probably my biggest turnoff with Jayden Daniels' tape, was those types of play calls. So that's a massive area for improvement, especially when you tie that to my next knock on him, and that is really where he thrived at LSU and how he thrived at LSU was pushing the ball outside the numbers to incredible wide receivers, a pair of top 20 picks or top 23 picks with ridiculous vertical speed that were the perfect fit for Jayden Daniels. And for some reason in college, these teams kept just running single high coverages against Jayden Daniels, cover 3 or cover 1, and just basically allowing Jayden Daniels to look at the safety pre-snap, say, okay, it's single high, snap the ball, make sure the safety stays single high. If he does, clean pocket. He had great pass protection as well. It was, all right, let's just make sure that outside corner comes down on, the outside wide receiver, and then boom, slot fade for a touchdown. It was like the majority of his highlight throws were just throwing those slot fades to those incredible wide receivers that were getting 5 steps of separation. So you have the surrounding cast was ridiculous. You have the way defenses were basically not game planning for Jayden Daniels. And you have the fact that when teams did run too high stuff against Jayden Daniels, I think that's when you really saw his processing slow down and his decision-making get a lot worse. There's an interception against Arkansas where he throws it right to a flat defender because he doesn't check the safeties to see if it's cover 2 or cover 4, that type of stuff. And in the NFL, it's all about rotating safeties, disguising coverages, reading the safeties to know what coverage you're getting. And honestly, at LSU, with the exception of what we described where, okay, check if it's single high, if it is, throw the slot fade. With the exception of that, Jayden Daniels really wasn't looking or reading the safeties much at all. it was much more reading his wide receivers and the leverage of the kind of apex defender there in the slot, and making a quick read off of that. So it's not that he can't do those things. You do see flashes of him progressing through the field and scanning his 1 to 2 to 3 and all that stuff that you want to see from an NFL quarterback. But it was few and far between, and he just has such a large room for growth in that area. It's just not going to be as easy as it was for him at LSU. So I think he's a lot further behind the 8 ball in terms of running an NFL offense than was kind of talked about. And that, of course, plays into him coming in 32nd in these rankings. But unfortunately, I do have a couple other areas of concern on Jayden Daniels. The more I watched of him, the less confident I was in his arm talent. He's got a great deep ball. He throws with touch up to about 55 yards. That's great. He throws it accurately. But he doesn't have the typical rocket arm that you would ideally pair with a quarterback whose best trait is throwing deep fades, right? Like, he can get it there, but there's a cap on it. There's a play against Arkansas as well where he gets a free play, steps into it, cross field. Brian Thomas, about 8 yards of separation. He underthrows it by 5 or 6 yards. Brian Thomas, the amazing wide receiver that he is, works back, mosses a DB, breaks a tackle, goes for a touchdown. Is that going to work in the NFL the same way? You tell me. But it's even more applicable with those intermediate types of throws, whether it's the digs that we talked about, or throwing a stop route in the outside, or throwing an out route. He doesn't have that zip on his fastball that really any of the quarterbacks outside of maybe Bo Nix in this class have. And if he is going to be marginally late on some of these throws, as he was at LSU, he doesn't have the arm talent to make up for being a little bit late. Whereas if you have a similar criticism on a guy like Drake May being a split second late on some of those throws, the zip on his fastball a lot of times can make up for those. So you don't really see that with Jayden Daniels. His margin for error on these throws in the short to intermediate is just a little bit smaller. And I think that also applies to what we said about him throwing on the run and getting out of the pocket and making some of those big throws down the field. Does he have the natural arm talent when he's off platform to really rip it down the field in the way that some of these great quarterbacks can? I think those are all legitimate questions with what we saw from his arm. And then the last thing here, and this is a point that I feel like a lot of people just bring up as a weakness and then just kind of laugh it off, but I think it's a real thing. Dude, Jayden Daniels has got to learn how to slide. I think it was Nate Tice, I want to give him credit, compared him to Johnny Knoxville, the star from Jackass. So accurate. Jayden Daniels is out there like getting himself intentionally into car wrecks like once a week, and he took a beating in the SEC. It's going to be even worse in the NFL. You don't even have to look outside of Washington for the last time a run-happy quarterback got hurt in RG3, and it is a legitimate worry for me. It's another aspect of his game that he legitimately has to improve. He has to learn how to slide, or I think there's a better than not chance that he gets severely injured throughout the course of this thing. So there's just a lot of stuff with him, man, that I was like, he's a first-round prospect. I think in a lot of years, if he goes number 2, he's a risky player, but you can be excited about it. But in this year, when you had a guy like Drake May there and they take Daniels that has all those flaws, that I couldn't go that far down the list on a guy like Drake May in terms of stuff that I'm worried about in the NFL. Not to mention he's 2 years younger. It's just where I'm at on Jayden Daniels. But he's a super electric player, really fun to watch. We're going to get to talk about him again when we get to the run game and how he can make an impact there. But again, unfortunately, I do rank him dead last among the quarterbacks in the passing game heading into the year. So I would say we navigated that well. I know I come off as a Jayden Daniels hater. It's just I enjoy him. I'm rooting for him. I want to be wrong about this. I'm just telling you what I saw as I got through his tape at LSU. Now, the depth chart is abysmal. I've seen enough Marcus Mariota to last a lifetime at this point. It was ugly when he stepped in for Atlanta. I think, he is what he is as backup, but he's not saving this team's season or anything like that. You got Jeff Driscoll, Jake Fromm, Sam Hartman comes here as an undrafted walk-on, if you will. Another guy that I watched his tape and was like, this dude, well, I don't think Jaden Daniels sucks. I think Sam Hartman sucks. He was a really tough watch. So it's all about Jaden Daniels in this room. He'll be the week 1 starter. I think no doubt here. But if you want a reason to believe in Jaden Daniels over maybe a Drake May, I think as we transition to the weaponry here, that's a huge nod towards Jaden Daniels, because he, on one hand, has a legitimate number 1 wide receiver in Terry McLaurin. And the weaponry here for Washington is pretty good. They rank kind of smack dab in the middle of the league, a league where a lot of these teams have excellent wide receiver rooms. And having a guy like Terry McLaurin, who I think is a top 10 quarterback that's just been waiting on adequate quarterback play that can sustain the production to warrant that, having that guy is huge for Washington. Really a do-it-all guy, best as a deep threat, where I think, his combination of release off the line of scrimmage, his long speed, and especially his ball tracking, body control, ability to come down with sensational catches down the field, it's towards the top of the league. And then, a really good route runner. He can stop on a dime if you want to throw him a hitch route, or if you want to stop and do an in-breaker with him. He can shake defenders really well. I would say in the short game, he does enough. He's not Devontae Adams out there in terms of just, dicing dudes up left and right with whip routes and slants and all that stuff. He's fine. He gets the job done in those areas. But it is really hard to find a hard word to say about Terry McLaurin other than he just hasn't had the quarterback play to let him prove that he is a tier 1 wide receiver. He's easily a superstar, true number 1 type based on the film. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities for him to have, even at this point in his career, that CeeDee Lamb breakout or that A.J. Brown breakout that we've seen from some of these guys, kind of taking that jump from, yeah, he's a number 1 to like, oh, this dude's one of the 4 or 5 best wide receivers in the league. I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibilities for a guy like Terry. So he's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, but he does. He lifts everybody else up. It allows Jahan Dotson to fill in his natural role, I think. The pro comp on him coming out a couple years ago was Emmanuel Sanders, who was always a good number 2 wide receiver in the league. And Jahan had a down year last year. For some reason, it just didn't work with him and Sam Howell. I talked about it at the top of the show, like getting through these Commanders games. Sam Howell was a lot worse than I think I gave him credit for last year, especially when it came to utilizing his kind of second read and a guy like Jahan Dotson that a lot of times he's coming open over the second level behind the linebackers, whether it's on a post or a dig. And Sam Howell just wouldn't have the patience to let the play develop. He was the classic, like, bails out of clean pockets type of quarterback. And Dotson should have seen a lot more valuable and good look targets than he did last year. And again, the hope is Jaden Daniels can get better at that stuff and be better than Sam Howell was. I'm not sure it will be, but he was there. He was open a lot more than he produced. Now, it wasn't all pretty from Jahan Dotson, especially when it came to a lot of the drops and specifically the catch in traffic stuff. I'm not terribly worried about it with Jahan Dotson, but it was really bad last year. He only came down with 4 out of 12 contested catch looks last year. So a lot of times, too, where it was like his smaller catch radius showed up as an issue. That's where some of the accuracy stuff on Sam Howell didn't help much. When he's running a crosser or a slant and the ball was just a little bit behind him, he didn't quite have the adjustments to come down with those catches. The thing is, you go back to his Penn State tape, and even in his first year in Washington, that stuff was almost a relative strength in his game. So you're hoping he can get that kind of my ball bitch mentality back in his game. This is the guy that sleeps with the football in his hands because he just has such good ball skills. That was there at Penn State. It all went away last year. That's really where you're hoping it'll come back, both not dropping the football and winning contested catches. In terms of who he is as an athlete, as a route runner, with his role within the offense as a number 2 wide receiver, I think he's a great complement to Terry McLaurin. We mentioned Terry is intermediate to deep, is his best part of his game. Jahan Dotson is short to intermediate, is the best part of his game. He's got great feet, he's a good route runner, could still improve his release package and get off press a little bit better, but he's still trending up in my opinion after what was a down year last year, and I expect that he will settle back in as a quality number 2, being that 16th overall pick that he was a couple years ago. But then it's going to be, I think, much more of a rotation here in terms of who the wide receiver 3 is for Washington. I will continue to defend my guy, Dyami Brown. I know I've gone at it with some of you Commanders fans that follow the channel that say I need to give up on Dyami Brown. And I'm like, look, man, when the quarterbacks you're playing with are Sam Howell, Taylor Heineke, and Carson Wentz, and not the good Carson Wentz, like, you're just not getting valuable targets, especially, Dyami Brown was a very good vertical threat at North Carolina. A lot of those good vertical targets are going to Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, and there just has been a horrible opportunity for Dyami Brown to show what he is. He's still young. He's only 24 years old, heading into a contract year here. And look, on a per target basis, he showed a little bit of something and honestly was more efficient than Jahan Dotson last year. So I'm not ready to quit Dyami Brown quite yet. I think he'll be very much in the mix. And I think he can make an impact from the slot. But when you go to 11 personnel, Dotson's going to play in the slot quite a lot. So I think Dyami Brown as the outside there works perfectly fine for me, giving him a chance there. But it's going to be a rotation with the number 3 wide receiver here. They did sign Olamide Zaccheaus, who is definitely a high floor slot, kind of playmaker type, quick feet, good with the ball in his hands, decent speed to kind of get lost on slot fades if they want to do some of that stuff with him that Jaden Daniels throws so well, obviously, what we saw at LSU. And then they draft Luke McCaffrey in the 3rd round. I was not a fan of that draft pick either. I just did not really see it with Luke McCaffrey. I know he tested very well, but the game speed to me just really didn't show. And I think when it comes to his route running, he's just behind the 8 ball. He was playing quarterback a couple years ago. So if you want to take the lens of like he's still getting used to the position, his play speed's only going to get better and better the more comfortable he is as a wide receiver, I think that's a fair enough approach. But also, I just didn't see dominant tape at Rice as a slot wide receiver. And do I really expect that he's going to come in and look better than Dyami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus? I personally don't. He's got a great last name. He's Christian's brother. Good bloodlines, all that. But I did think it was an overdraft, and we'll kind of see how this plays out for him. Being a 3rd round pick, it's not like he's by default going to be in the lineup. If he's not better than Zaccheaus and Brown in camp, they're not going to just put him out there because they drafted him this year. He'll get his reps, but I'm probably lower on him as the starting slot wide receiver here than I think a lot of the projections will say. I think it's going to be a big rotation. He'll get his looks, but I certainly don't think it's, okay, he's a plug-and-play slot wide receiver. That's just not what I saw from him when I watched his tape. But those are going to be your main 5. They're going to have a competition probably for a 6th wide receiver on this team. I don't think they keep 7 based on the other names they have in the building. You got Dax Milne. He was Zach Wilson's deep threat at BYU. Was a 7th round pick several years ago. Jamison Crowder's still hanging around here. I think that's going to come down to how much they like what Luke McCaffrey does for them throughout camp. If he looks like a good backup or a potential starter in the slot, they might let Crowder go. If they don't like so much what McCaffrey's able to do, they might keep Jamison Crowder around, who is kind of just your de facto slot depth in the league at this point. And then I'm still keeping an eye on my guy Mitchell Tinsley out of Penn State via Western Kentucky. very physical, kind of tough wide receiver, not the most physically gifted guy in the world, but reminded me a lot of Kendrick Bourne in terms of play style. Was one of my favorite sleepers in last year's draft class. So if he makes the team, I mean, I thought he was a more talented wide receiver than Luke McCaffrey. I just did. So, probably never going to age out that way based on the draft investment. But if he makes the team, it could mean something. They also brought in Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, who somehow ran a 4.840 at his workout. He's faster than that, but that did lead him to go undrafted. He's kind of a toolsy, high recruiting background type of dude out of Georgia. Probably a practice squad stash there for them. But it's a good wide receiver room. It's nothing insane, but certainly good enough to get the job done. And some. But, the tight end room is pretty poor. It's one of the worst tight end rooms in the league. I will admit that. You've got Zach Ertz, the skeleton of Zach Ertz, coming via the Detroit Lions practice squad most recently, but was on the Cardinals last year. Obviously knows this offense, played with Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona, had some good years there. This is an offense that will flex that tight end out wide. They don't require size and blocking ability from that tight end, so it's a good scheme fit for Zach Ertz, obviously. But he's very much just a possession tight end at this point, kind of running stick routes and slants and, being a big target in the short game. Not going to offer much after the catch or anything like that, and he's an injury risk. I don't feel like it's worth spending too much time on Zach Ertz. He's a temporary Band-Aid, maybe a used Band-Aid. Poor Zach Ertz, but it's kind of an accurate description of what he is at this point in his career. The hope is, he can buy you just enough games and enough reps to get Ben Sinnott ready to play in this offense. Second round pick. One of my favorite prospects in this draft. Didn't know he was going to go in the second round, though that's where I kind of had him graded. He's still young in terms of playing time. Walked on at Kansas State, got into the lineup in year 3, and then year 4 he kind of took off. It's a really good fit in this offense to be that sort of Zach Ertz role because he is so good in space, but he's an even better blocker than Zach Ertz is. Out wide on those bubble screens they're going to run a lot of here, but he has more girth to him to actually step inside and block in line. He just needs to improve his technique there. But yeah, really talented player. I think by year's end, whether it's a Zach Ertz injury or he just eventually takes that job, I think Ben Sinnott can be a impactful player for this offense. I don't know that he'll ever be a superstar tight end. He is a little bit shorter. I wouldn't say his receiving skills and his feel for being a receiver down the field is anything special. It gets the job done. So again, I don't know that he'll ever be a superstar tight end. I'm not going to say he can't be, but I definitely think he can emerge throughout the next 500 days or so as a quality starter for them as a second round pick. But he's also going to have to kind of get through John Bates as well on this depth chart. Bates is an underrated player in the sense that I do think he's a very good blocking tight end. Now, this isn't the best system for a big-bodied blocking tight end to get a lot of playing time, but it is another guy in the way that is theoretically good at the position, or at least aspects of the position. He's not much of a receiving threat. But then you also have Cole Turner, who's another one of these receiving types of tight ends, actually showed flashes last year, really was efficient in the looks that he got. So another guy that could compete for that role if Ben Sinnott isn't quite as ready as we hope. And then also got to keep an eye on Armani Rogers, a converted quarterback out of, was it Miami, Ohio? Was an interesting pickup for them, and then missed his rookie season last year for an injury. So another guy to kind of keep an eye on. They've got some interesting athletes and receiving tight ends in that room. They're obviously expecting Ben Sinnott to be the guy that emerges there, but Cole Turner and Armani Rogers as depth pieces and practice squad options are not bad little flyers to have in the building. But obviously, not a great room right now. They're hoping in time it can be a strength for them. And then the running backs, they bring in Austin Eckler. Unfortunately, I'm just not very high on what Austin Eckler is at this point. He has received a massive workload throughout his career. He kind of knew this was coming heading into last year. He wanted his contract. He was threatening to hold out. He ended up playing anyway, and man, I just don't know that he has it anymore. He's obviously still very skilled. He runs good routes. He catches the ball well. He can kind of, see the field well on screens and stuff. He'll still be a useful player as he was last year. But at 29 years old, when I really did think we saw real physical regression, it just happens with these running backs at a certain point in time. And with Eckler, he was just so clearly slowed down and not the guy he's been in years past. Maybe he was dealing with an injury and he can get healthy and get back to being that, premium receiving threat. But I'm really, he's going to get the job done. He'll be reliable. He won't hurt this offense or hold them back. But I really don't see a dynamic player at this point that's going to elevate this room either. You'll also throw the ball to Brian Robinson at times. He's fine. A speed train type of runner. He's got fine hands. He made some exciting plays in the receiving game last year. Even showed some good routes out of the backfield. So, don't write off Brian Robinson as a receiving threat. And then the other guy I would kind of keep an eye on in that room would be Michael Wiley. I thought his receiving skills out of Arizona were really good. I would just say shades of Rashad White in his tape. Not quite as dynamic with the jump cut, but in terms of the overall athleticism and the smooth hands, I saw some stuff there. So if he makes the team, or at least stash him as a practice squad guy behind Eckler for a year or two, someone to kind of monitor throughout the years, had some skills I liked. But yeah, the weaponry for Washington ultimately comes in as a B. Helped out a lot by having that true number one. Love what Dotson could be for this team. And then it's a lot of question marks behind that. So kind of a middle of the pack room there, but it's more than good enough in terms of, you want a young quarterback to go somewhere that he's got good players to throw the football to. He's got a handful of them here in Washington for sure. But let's transition to the backfield here, and then we'll go to the offensive line and kind of put together this whole offense here. But it's in terms of the running backs here, it's an okay group. They're C+ graded room. They rank 20th to 28th. They'll get the job done, but it's nothing that's going to be overly exciting for me. I guess my main take on this room is that I could see the fantasy football world overhyping what Austin Eckler is going to be for this team, whereas I see Brian Robinson as the primary running back for the Commanders, especially first and second downs. I think will belong to Brian Robinson. And again, I think Brian Robinson showed enough as a receiving back that you might want him out there on a 3rd and 3 type of situation as well. So I guess if I have a take, it's that I definitely expect Brian Robinson to be the leading rusher on this team and the primary snap getter in this group, with Eckler being kind of down into that true 3rd down scat back role with this team. But Robinson's a big bodied dude. He is the guy that's going to be the reliable between the tackles runner, especially with what we saw in the physical regression from Austin Eckler last year. I think his vision's really good. He trusts his hole and has really good, I don't want to say acceleration. He doesn't necessarily have that first step burst, but he's got really good building long speed. And once he hits that second or third step, it breaks a lot of pursuit angles from linebackers because he's faster than you'd think for such a bigger back. And he can kind of win those angles to the outside and get some explosive runs. He'll run through you. He's not the most shifty guy. He's not going to create the most out of poorly blocked runs. But I think he's a good running back, right? So to me, he's getting 65% of the workload here. He'll be very solid. And then Eckler, I'm pretty low on what we saw from him last year. So if he's in there, I am worried about, him thinking he can win an angle that he used to and getting ran down to the sideline, or him trying to run a guy over and not being able to generate enough momentum to fight for tough yardage. So I don't think he's a guy that should be getting a lot of carries here, and maybe they start the year giving him more carries than they should. We'll kind of see how they balance this room out. But I think these two guys together at the end of the day are an adequate group. They're not going to really elevate the run game, but they're not going to hold it back too much either. Now, what will elevate this run game, before we talk about some of the backups here, is Jaden Daniels. And we talked about this earlier where, he ranks 32nd for passing grade. heading into the year, but he's basically in the top 5 for the quarterback run multiplier. 3 quarterbacks are going to come in here with a B+ kind of grade for me in terms of the QB run multiplier. And just to put that in perspective in terms of what that does for this team, they go from my 28th ranked run game in the league to my 20th ranked run game just because of Jaden Daniels' impact, adding a numbers advantage in terms of read options and occupying a guy, creating an extra blocker, but also, of course, how dynamic he is with the ball in his hands. So I don't want to just dismiss what that's going to bring to the table when you draft a guy like Jaden Daniels. And what we saw from Cliff Kingsbury is he's very good at, tapping into this with a guy like Kyler Murray. So that's going to be one of the most exciting aspects of this Commanders football team is what they're able to do on early downs with Jaden Daniels and how much it's also going to open things up and elevate guys like a Brian Robinson. So I don't think this is going to be a bad run game, and I think Jaden Daniels is obviously a massive part of that. But back to the running back depth real quick. We mentioned Michael Wiley as someone to keep an eye on. That's more as a receiving threat down the road, wasn't much of a running threat. And then Chris Rodriguez is just 85% of Brian Robinson. He's kind of a north and south power back, was a late round pick last year. He's fine. If Brian Robinson goes down, he can tote the rock a little bit. But yeah, this is pretty much all about Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler this year. And then kind of likewise with the quarterback depth. Mariota can do some read option stuff, did that in Atlanta, as you can do with Jeff Driscoll. So if anything happens to Jaden Daniels, they don't have to really change the playbook with Mariota there. But let's talk about the all-important offensive line. It's a motley crew of adequacy in Washington, I would say, with the exception of Sam Cosmi, who I really like. But it's a lot of veteran Band-Aids here with this group. And I'm not going to lie, it's not the most exciting or promising tandem for this team. And while we're excited about the receiving room, maybe not so much with the O-line. They actually come in ranked really close to the bottom. C grade overall, but 28th to 31st in terms of offensive line rankings. The nice thing here is they don't really have a weak link until someone gets hurt. Now, there's maybe 4 or 5 offensive lines a year where you don't suffer significant injuries, and their depth has got to be very close to the actual worst in the league. There's not really a single player waiting in the wings that I trust to step in and basically not be a turnstile for Jaden Daniels. And you start at left tackle in a 33-year-old Cornelius Lucas that has had a hard time staying healthy throughout his career. And that's a huge question mark, right? Left tackle. And we don't actually know if they're going to start Cornelius Lucas because, in my opinion, they overdrafted Brandon Coleman, who had some of the most abysmal tackle tape in this class with horrible foot speed, tested really well and has length and quote-unquote looks the part. But when they took him in the top of the 3rd round, I was like, are you kidding me? That's the left tackle they might be rolling with for Jaden Daniels? I thought he was almost a certain candidate to kick into guard because of how bad his footwork was at tackle. So because of how highly they drafted Brandon Coleman, they might feel inclined to actually start him over Cornelius Lucas. And that would be a huge mistake, in my opinion. Now, I hope I'm wrong, right? For Commanders fans' sake, for Jaden Daniels' sake, for Brandon Coleman's sake. I hope he's a stud, and he's a great left tackle. I'm just telling you, that is not what I saw from him on his TCU tape. It's not what I saw from him in person at the Senior Bowl. So I think they'll get through camp and be like, yeah, Cornelius Lucas is a much better player than Brandon Coleman. He's been a very sound, average backup swing tackle throughout his career, now kind of thrust into more of a demanding starting position. Again, it's more of a health concern than it is he would be a problem. But even when he's playing, it's like he's fine, but he will have his losses. He's nothing special, and that applies as a run blocker as well. He's very strong, got the length profile that you look for in getting guys' way, but has never really been this dominant run blocker either. So it's nice that he's around, but how many games are you getting out of him? I think the over-under on him is probably about 9. We'll see. a little more solid other than that. Nick Allegretti is a projection, has never been a starter in the NFL, but I actually feel relatively confident that he can be okay for them. It goes all the way back to him coming out of Illinois. I thought he was a sleeper in that draft, but in his rookie season for the Chiefs, he had to play in that first Super Bowl against the Bucs, I think it was, and just couldn't really hold up against a great pass rush. Had to kind of overcome the perception of who he was as a player and continue to get better, but was a really valuable player for the Chiefs with 3-position internal flexibility at either guard spot or at center. He's a fine pass protector. He ended up holding up okay in the Super Bowl. They lost Joe Thuney, and he stepped in and did his job very well. I was worried about how he was going to handle some of those pass rushers for the Niners, and he did okay. I like the signing. You could maybe even argue there should be an arrow pointing up on him, but he was a 7th-round pick for a reason. He doesn't have this super high upside or great athletic ability, but I'm excited for him that he's kind of earned this opportunity to be a starting guard, but he's far from a guarantee there. You got Tyler Biadasz, who's been very solid again for the Cowboys. Not really a guy you want to trust holding up one-on-one, not this sensational athlete that's going to displace a bunch of guys off the ball in the run game, but smart, gets his leverage, gets the job done, can be that veteran presence for a young Jaden Daniels to kind of help with protections and make sure you're not getting all these crazy stunts and stuff, blowing up gaps and stuff. So he can account for some of that. It was a necessary signing, nothing you're going to be overly excited about, but it's fine. Now, Sam Cosmi at right guard, I'm a big fan. I was actually really excited to get to their tape to watch Sam Cosmi because I know he graded out exceptionally well, but I wasn't fully focused on Sam Cosmi watching the condensed games on the broadcast at the end of last year for this Commanders team. But yeah, I mean, he's really good, dude. He's kind of got it all. He's a former tackle, so he's got a lot of the foot speed and overall technique you look for in an offensive lineman for pass protection. It's not perfect there. Sometimes his pad level can get a little high, and he'll let guys kind of under his chest, and he'll get blown back or get turned. That's kind of where you see some of his losses. But he's bulked up. He's a much stronger player than he ever was at Texas. He's got that dickhead mentality you look for in the run game. He buries dudes. He throws guys to the ground. He finishes blocks. He finished the second half of last year as one of the best guards in football. And I think because of that, they're going to keep him here. But I will say there is an option if they want to be kind of smart about this, in my opinion. If Lucas goes down and Brandon Coleman is as bad as I think he is, I would move Sam Cosmi to left tackle. It's what he played at Texas. He wouldn't be probably as good there as he's been at guard in recent weeks, but at least as a part, a short-term plan, that to me feels like an option. I like that flexibility. But contract year coming up for Cosmi. I would anticipate that he has a really great season. Maybe is a bit of a surprising contract when it comes in. One of those Shefty bombs. It's midway through the year where it's like Washington has agreed to terms with right guard Sam Cosmi, 4 years, $84 million, and people are like, what? I didn't even think he was good. But Commanders fans will know that he's like really the only true good piece they have, and really arguably the only long-term piece that they have on this offensive line. Then you got Andrew Wiley at right tackle. Very solid. He played even better than I thought he would last year. Very balanced player. He's played some guard, played some tackle. He's definitely bulked up and handles power better than he did a couple years ago for the Chiefs. I think he kind of got exposed there and has done a good enough job to compensate for that. Improving that anchor a little bit. Had some better run blocking reps than I expected getting through this Commanders team. So I'm not really worried about him at right tackle. He'll have his losses. But Cosmi and Wiley, even over to Biadasz at center, it's very solid. The left side of the line is where I'm really worried. And we mentioned the depth. Who are you really counting on? We've kind of trashed Brandon Coleman. He's got the physical traits. That's really about it. To me, he screamed 5th, 6th round guy with sloppy technique. He's a 6-year player at TCU that couldn't put things together. He stops his feet. He needs coaching. That's his big issue. So I'm not counting on him. Chris Paul played at left guard last year. He was very raw coming in, and he certainly had his struggles, especially in pass protection last year. I'm kind of interested in Braden Daniels. They spent a 4th-round pick on him out of Utah, really athletic guy, but he's going to be behind the 8 ball coming off the injury, having to change, coaching staffs and front office. Like, do the people in this building believe in him? They weren't the team that drafted him, but he's a name to keep an eye on. It's basically his rookie season. Ricky Stromberg was a 3rd-round pick out of Arkansas. I thought he was slightly overdrafted, just not the best pass protector. But maybe if you're talking about a scenario where Cosme has to play left tackle, he would probably be the guy that I think could be a guard in there in year 2 for him. Michael Dieter really has not worked out, just an abysmal athlete that struggles to keep up with NFL athletes. And then Trent Scott's the only other guy with quote unquote proven starting abilities, at least as a run blocker, where he's been okay. Pass protection for him though has been a nightmare. So it's a big question mark, man. I don't think it's controversial to say that. You better be saying your prayers, Commanders fan, that Cornelius Lucas can get through the season healthy until you can find a left tackle, whether that's Coleman developing or what. Or just pray that I'm stupid and wrong about Brandon Coleman and he's a stud as a top 65 pick or whatever they spent on him. But it's certainly not the most exciting group as we've talked about. And then in terms of the run blocking skill players, it's not a priority in a Cliff Kingsbury system. I will say that, and that's probably for the best. They don't have great run blockers here. Particularly Zach Ertz will probably be the worst run blocking starting tight end in the NFL week 1. They do have John Bates. I just don't know how much they're going to be able to use him and integrate him into the system, but I really like him when he's playing. And then Ben Sinnott has the strength and the athleticism to be a good run blocker, just has to improve his technique and his stickiness as a run blocker. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson are not really known for their physicality at the line of scrimmage, so certainly not a group that elevates the run block rating as some other teams might. But what does that all mean for the Commanders' offense? Well, I've got them coming in as a very abysmal passing game. They actually ranked 31st there, which isn't a huge surprise with the questions at quarterback, offensive line, and really coaching. Those groups have a lot to prove. And even though the wide receiver room, you've got Terry McLaurin, but a lot of other question marks. So 31st for passing game. They are 20th in the run game, obviously boosted by what we said with Jaden Daniels, a decent running back room. I think the coaching will be fun there. Cosme is a monster in the run game, so they're going to be able to do some fun stuff. And, they're going to provide some schematic challenges too. There's probably going to be some 200-yard rushing weeks from this team where you're getting big performances from Brian Robinson and Jaden Daniels. I'm a lot lower on what Eckler's going to do in the run game, but I think that's going to be one of the relative strengths of this Commanders team. Ultimately, this spits out, to me, projected as the 31st best or 31st worst offense in that case. But it's, they're going to be kind of grouped with a cluster of teams towards the bottom. But let's now do Dan Quinn's defense and if they're going to be any better on that side of the ball. And we'll start with the defensive line, which is a solid to good group. It's a relative strength for this defense that's trying to put things together. Especially when you look at the interior defensive line, you're expecting that to be a real strength for this team. But even then, they kind of have some questions. So you've got your two mainstays in Allen and Payne, both coming off kind of, I don't want to say career low years, but definitely down years relative to where they've been over the last maybe 2+ seasons. And I don't necessarily look at this duo like, oh my God, they're complete game wreckers. They're closer to that than they are just like average talent, right? They're a very good duo. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. But I will say there's a reason they drafted Johnny Newton where they did. I think, especially in the case of Jonathan Allen, who's just turned 30 and has had his questions, I think, honestly, like in terms of run defense, and I always hate to question a guy's effort, but there's really no reason Jonathan Allen shouldn't be a better run defender. He's big, he's strong, he can get off blocks, but I don't know if it's a lack of instincts or if he's taking plays off for pass rush downs or what. But that's there with Jonathan Allen. And it shows on tape. Like, I've always kind of focused on that when I watch these guys, because his PFF run defense grades, Jonathan Allen, throughout his career are like really bad. And last year, he had a 38 PFF run defense grade, which was way down from kind of being a career like 60 average run defense. So like they're saying he's fine against the run. Last year it was like, no, he was abysmal. And I was really curious to see what that was all about. And you did kind of see it where he just wasn't seeing the ball heading his way. He was going to that dead leg technique where he drops his leg to eat up double teams. He was going to that even when he was getting single teamed and kind of just taking himself out of the play. So I think they're kind of anticipating getting ready for a transition out of Jonathan Allen. Now, he still has a nasty bull rush. He really was showing off that kind of corkscrew bull rush that's become a signature for him, generates a lot of push. I still think he's a better pass rusher than Daron Payne. He's got some finesse to his game. He still has some quickness. But even there, he has not been able to sustain that 2021 season where he was like a 67 pressure, 10 sack guy. He had that monster season. The last 2 years, he's been a pretty consistent low-end number one interior rusher in the sense that he's been pretty consistently, 48 pressures, 7 sacks, more or less, the last 2 years, which is a very good player, but not a game wrecker. And I think that's all good and well, but if you're looking for a D-line to have that true number one piece, it's not Jonathan Allen, and it might be heading in the wrong direction as well. But then you do have Daron Payne next to him, who is a very, very good number two interior defensive lineman to have. Very balanced player. I think quite clearly a better run defender than Jonathan Allen. A little better play strength. I think he sees the run a little better, plays potentially with better effort. It just shows up, and pretty consistently in these two guys' time here, he gets a good 20% more defensive stop and tackle production in the run game than a guy like Jonathan Allen. But even then, he has his moments too, where he's either getting blown off the ball against a double team or not seeing the run come his way or whatever it might be. Missing tackles in the backfield has been a problem for him. So he's a good run defender, but not a great one. And then I would say he's a very good pass rusher. His efficiency took a step down last year, but I think in Daron Payne's case, it had a lot more to do with a huge uptick in seeing double teams. Once those edge rushers were traded, there was no threat off the edge. They were leaving their tackles on an island and helping out the interior guys against guys like Allen and Payne. I think Allen knew how to handle double teams a little bit more, whereas Payne did see an uptick in double teams, and when he got doubled, it was like, yeah, there's really not a whole lot he could do. But when left one-on-one, which you should see more of here, he's got a swim move, he's got some power, he can win as a rusher. He's a very good number two. So that's kind of the strength of this team. And then they add Johnny Newton to the mix here, and they're hoping, ideally, this can be a kind of dynamic trio, and they can find a way to get these three guys on the field and provide some real problems to the point that maybe this can be more of a B- or a B pass rush. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities, but honestly, they got a little bit of a buzzkill in terms of this news on Johnny Newton's foot injury. He already kind of missed the pre-draft process with one of these surgeries, and now he has to have another. He falls in the draft of the second round. It's like vibes aren't great with Johnny Newton right now in terms of how big of an impact he can be really out the gate in his rookie season. Now, I'm going to be an optimist and say he can get out there kind of around October and really start to see that uptick. But when you're talking about a guy that is a rookie and is going to be the they were going to have to kind of find some schematic creativity to get him on the field, obviously, because they already have Allen and Payne in this room. If he's not there for camp and they're formulating their game plans and what this new defense is going to look like, it's going to be a lot harder for them to integrate him into their system right away. So it could take a little bit with Johnny Newton, but loved the draft pick. My pro comp on him is Javon Hargrave, where his finesse, his quickness is too much for interior offensive linemen to handle. And he really has that type of upside to be one of the 10 best pass rushing interior players in the league. And I think they look at John Allen's kind of trajectory, being 30 years old, being more of a pass rush over run defense type. And they, I would think, see Johnny Newton as a seamless bridge into that DT1 role with Daron Payne next to him. And wouldn't even be as much surprised if this team's struggling, but Newton's getting on the field, if they do what they did last year. And around the deadline, they go get a second-round pick for Jonathan Allen and continue to build up other parts of the team. It wouldn't be the least bit surprising if they went that route. So I'm still very excited about Johnny Newton, but when we're talking about week 1, week 3, I don't know how much we're going to get from him because that injury it just sucks. Like, it's going to slow him down a little bit out the gate. But it's a special trio, right? They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, though, because you look at the edge group and it's still close to, if not the worst edge room in the league. I mean, you're talking about them signing Dorrance Armstrong to a pretty significant contract here, who was a rotational starter for Dallas. He now has to be their number 1 off the edge. He's got to take a major leap, right? They're hoping that this can be similar to when the Bengals signed Trey Hendrickson. And people were like, oh, he was a third. Myself, this idiot right here was like, Trey Hendrickson is a number 3 rusher, and they gave him $15 million a year. What are the Bengals doing? And then it turns out he gets starting reps, and he's a monster. I'm not going to say that's impossible for Dorrance Armstrong, but it's a leap, right? They're hoping that that's what can happen with him. I would much more project him as like he's a solid starter. He's a physical run defender, can play early down work. He's got some ways to win as a rusher. He's got a little power. He's got a little finesse. But I just don't see this remarkable player in any regard. I think they had to kind of pay up to get their guy in the building here. It was fine enough. He's the best player they have in that room. But am I excited about Dorrance Armstrong as edge 1? No, I'm not. There's no way around it. And then what I'm really not excited about is Clelin Ferrell and Dante Fowler are kind of together edge 2. Like, okay, that's not really adequate or serviceable or what you want at all. I anticipate this will be a Ferrell on early downs and Dante Fowler on later downs type of situation. Fowler is a little bit more of that bendy, juicy, situational pass rusher. Ferrell has bounced around the league, kind of ate up some dirty work, and he's been a solid enough 4th edge for the Niners, but now it's like, okay, those 2 guys are going to have to play a lot of time here. Yeah, it's going to drag this ranking down, right? If this was a B- D-line for the interior group or even a B D-line, that edge group is going to drag them down to being more of a C+ type of group. The other guy that I think will be in the starting mix here that I'm interested to see how they use is Frankie Louvu, who's played all over the formation. He's played every linebacker spot in the book, including edge linebacker, just throughout his time. This is the Dan Quinn regime that, had the Micah Parsons kind of screaming edge outside linebacker spot in their front. So I think he'll play a lot of early down edge stuff as well. And I like that. That's actually... especially when it comes to the run defense, you might look at this and be like, I see more of a C group with the run defense. I think it actually gets bumped up to a C+ because of how I anticipate that they'll use Frankie Louvu, because I think Jamin Davis and Bobby Wagner will be more of the middle linebackers here. When Louvu's off the edge, he is a demon to try to run past. He has just incredible effort to blow guys up. If you end up with a tight end on him, kiss it goodnight. He's going to just detonate the tight end, got great instincts, gets off the ball, finds the ball, a ton of backfield production over the years. So he was a really nice signing. but it's more of wait and see in terms of how they use him, but had to put him into the mix here. And that's probably your starting group. Then you're getting into the depth where it's just not very exciting. I like F.A. Obata as a situational depth rusher. He's a big kind of athletic problem for some people. He has some splash games. Has never been a good run defender though. Plays with high pad level. KJ Henry was a 5th round pick. A lot of people liked. To me, just NFL backup type. Didn't really do much in his rookie year. Andre Jones, likewise. One note on Andre Jones is really good at getting his hands up and deflecting footballs. Led the team in batted balls with 3, despite only playing 171 total snaps. So that was definitely impressive, the way he kind of had those instincts to swat stuff down in front of him. And then they take Jean Baptiste, 7th round, was very much kind of a depth play for me. He's got quick feet, but really an abysmal pass rusher. I don't see a starter in there for him. So, and they got adequate depth. That is what it is. And then interior D-line, they're waiting on Fedarian Mathis to kind of do anything. I thought he was overdrafted in the 2nd round when they took him. Really has not been able to get on the field a whole lot. And when he's out there, it hasn't been pretty. So they're hoping he can take a leap in year 3 as a 2nd round pick out of Alabama. Not a ton of signs that that's going to happen, but he might get an added opportunity if Newton's not ready to go right away. You got John Ridgway, who's a space eater, Potoe, who's kind of an undersized type. They're actually pretty thin in terms of interior D-line if Johnny Newton's not going to be ready for them right away. But I guess that's something Dan Quinn is familiar with coming from Dallas. So it's a motley crew. Like I said, man, they're going to be moving these guys all over the place. They're going to be kind of waiting to see where they're going to use Luvu, how much Newton's going to be able to get on the field, who that other edge guy is going to emerge for them, if there's anyone. Can Dorrance Armstrong take a step up? It's a group loaded with questions. They filled it with NFL pieces, but the end result, I think, is going to be pretty middling. Helped out, of course, by still having those studs in the middle with Allen and Payne. One quick little plug here, by the way. My guy Jalen down there in Florida has been balling out, putting this little deep dive tool together, which is going to be a Patreon benefit this year for the MVP level patrons. That's at patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. But the deep dive series has taken another step this year. We are going to have an interactive tool with blurbs and something you can kind of pull up, whether you're getting ready for a fantasy draft or approaching the series or just want something to look at before bed. Just a really cool thing here that I think the deep dive enthusiasts will appreciate. So it's going to be a Patreon benefit. I'm showing you kind of some of the screenshots of how this works here. Might be referring to it a little bit throughout the summer as well, but just want to let you know that that's going on. It's a really cool thing. Shout out Jalen for putting this together. But let's talk about the linebacker room. Maybe under the radar, like my favorite part of this team, or at least the group I'm really excited to see what Dan Quinn can get out of these guys. They have essentially every archetype of linebacker that you could kind of build in the NFL in this room. And I think Dan Quinn is a linebacker guru that could do some really fun stuff with this room and these skill sets. So you got Jamin Davis, who's your sort of 3-down, do-it-all linebacker. Currently not listed as a starter for them. I disagree. To me, he is their starter, the 3-down guy. They spent a first-round pick on him. I know it wasn't this regime, but his growth trajectory with his athleticism really emerged as a pretty good run defender last year, really improved his tackling consistency. You can see he's getting better and better with his run keys. The coverage side of things is still... It doesn't match, his mind doesn't match what his body is physically capable of. There's just not a lot of coverage production from him to this point. He can obviously man guys up, but that's really about it. Still doesn't really know what he's looking at in coverage, but to me, the arrow's still pointing up on him. He's the type of young, freaky, athletic linebacker that you don't just give up on because you have a new staff coming in, so... I'm still anticipating he's going to be the true 3-down linebacker, the quote-unquote Mike or, starting linebacker here. And then the rest of these guys, again, I'm really excited to see what they do here. I would anticipate Bobby Wagner, first and second downs, will be the run stuffing specialist, a bit of a commander on the field, but can be at least, I would expect Jamin Davis is the green dot guy unless they give it to one of the safeties. But I would expect Jamin Davis is the green dot guy because I think he'll be out there on all 3 downs. But it might be Bobby Wagner, green dot being the guy that has the communication with the coaching staff. But at least in terms of making sure guys are lined up and in their run fits and being that extra voice in the huddle, Bobby Wagner is better at that than anybody in the league at this point with his experience and how smart of a football player he is. But at this stage in his career, his third down work is ugly, man. Like watching the Seahawks a little bit. I wanted to do the Commander-Seahawks game of all 22 early here because Wagner came over from Seattle. I wanted to see what he really looked like here before we talked about him. And he just does not move well in space at all. Like, this might be a hot take, but there's like you put Johnny Newton out there next to Bobby Wagner, he might move a little better than Bobby at this point. Like, he is that stiff. He doesn't have that speed, the juice. He's a traditional early down run stopper at this stage in his career. He can still kind of get his long arms and navigate in zone to the right spots at times because he's so smart. But again, I think they might take him off the field on third downs. Now, he still is a good blitzer. He actually has developed some spin moves and stuff when he faces guys in the hole. So if he is playing third downs, I want him blitzing. I really don't want him dropping. But you look at how Dan Quinn used his linebackers in Dallas. A huge rotation, right? I don't think he's going to be afraid to take Bobby off the field for dime packages and get creative with both Luvu and Chin. So, I mentioned, I think early downs, you're going to see a lot of Luvu up on the edge, whether it's as a true edge, 5 tech, or, kind of that walk up strong side linebacker in a 4-3 odd look. But, you're going to see a lot of that. And then when third downs arrive or any sort of passing situation, I think we see Davis, Luvu, and Jeremy Chin all as a part of the linebacker group, where Luvu is okay in coverage, but a tenacious blitzer, one of the best blitzing linebackers in the league. So really curious to see how he's used. He's got pass rush moves. You can put him off the edge. He has the play strength to kind of be the blow up man on a stunt, to allow a looper to come into his gap. Like, you can do so many things with him as a blitzer. And he just moves better than Bobby at this point in terms of coverage. So he'll be on the field. And then Jeremy Chin, I think, plays that Jaron Curse role, which is going to be listed as a safety because I think that's what the players want. But it's a linebacker. You look at Jaron Curse's splits, and he is playing essentially every snap as a linebacker on passing downs, or manned up on a tight end, or manned up on a big slot. I can only imagine that Dan Quinn looked at this roster and said, we don't have that big safety. I need that guy for my system, and saw Jeremy Chin out there in free agency and kind of how the Panthers misused him over the last couple of years. And, he struggled as a deep safety for the Panthers. He wasn't able to play in Fangio's system, Avero's system, which is a Fangio-style tree. But when he was used around the line of scrimmage in his rookie year, he was a defensive rookie of the year candidate because of his ball production. He was kind of a poor man's Kyle Hamilton coming into the league in the way that they used him initially, and then they just got away from it. So to me, Jeremy Chin has a huge potential in this system as the coverage linebacker who can get the depth, can see the field, man up tight ends. Really excited for him as a potential breakout candidate this year. Took a 1-year deal and really couldn't have gone to a coach that is going to find the best role for him. So I've got the arrow pointing up on Jeremy Chin as one of the players I'm most excited to see play for Dan Quinn's defense here. And honestly, you see them grade out as a C for linebacker coverage. That's pretty much all Jeremy Chin, because Jamin Davis and Bobby Wagner, if those are your 2 linebackers on third down, it's not going to get a whole lot worse than those 2 unless Davis takes a big leap. Luvu's pretty one-dimensional in terms of coverage stuff. But I really think Jeremy Chinn's going to be an impact, and if he has the breakout, I think he could. This could be more of a B or a B plus linebacker coverage group because he could be a real problem as that chess piece for this defense. So a really fun room. In terms of depth, Michael Walker is like a journeyman cover linebacker at this point. He's fine. Could probably play Jamin Davis's role if as a true 3-down linebacker if he goes down. Jordan McGee is kind of the true classic developmental linebacker, but a lot of potential, a good mid-round pick out of Temple. And then, Anthony Pittman, Keandre Jones, Bo Bauer, that's more like, roster bubble types. But a B- overall ranking for the linebackers, coming in the top half of the league there, tying for 13th overall in the league. And they made some really fun signings here, and it's going to be, I think, a pretty major strength for this team, honestly. Excited to see how they're used. But not so much optimism for the secondary. They come in as a C- grade for me for defensive back coverage. Very close to the bottom of the league there. There's youth here. There's a world where this turns into a pretty fun group. But even then, like their outside corner room, which carries a lot of weight with the DB rankings, is abysmal, man. Like they just, unless you're hoping Emmanuel Forbes can really turn things around from a really rough rookie season, it's like, ooh, man, I don't know if this is a workable outside cornerback room. Let's start there, and then we can end on a better note. But yeah, Michael Davis had a really bad year for the Chargers after a huge season in 2022. Big physical corner, but I think is slowing down and didn't have the best speed to begin with. To me, Michael Davis ideally would be your kind of first corner off the bench, not your number one corner, right? So that's kind of where we're starting with on him. He was available for cheap for a reason for this team. And then you got Benjamin St-Juste. He's interesting to me. I actually like a lot of the stuff I saw from St-Juste. But here's kind of the problem is I really only like him as that big slot corner. He's a very unique player where he's got great size, great length, and really great quick twitch athleticism. But his long speed's really poor. So you put him on the outside and he's kind of unbalanced. He gets beat a lot. Guys just stack him on the outside. His recovery isn't great. And most of his bad reps, which there were plenty last year, came on the outside. When they played him in the slot, his quickness, his length, his run defense, which is exceptional, is actually really good. But they're obviously not going to play him in the slot. They drafted Saintner still in the second round, and Quan Martin is kind of a slot defender to this point in time. Even Jeremy Chinn is in part a slot defender. So they are counting on St-Juste to be an outside corner. And if he were just as a slot corner, I would have him as a 74 coverage grade with an up arrow. But that's not how they're going to use him, right? So he's a much worse projection on the outside, in my opinion. And I don't even know that he's going to start because they do have Emmanuel Forbes, who I feel like we kind of just dismissed earlier. He still has potential. He had a disastrous rookie season. That much was clear. To be fair, Ron Rivera is one of those, old coaches that hates rookies and isn't going to give you a chance. And, Forbes had his hiccups, but they totally set him up to fail just in terms of playing time, but also they had him out there trying to cover A.J. Brown and D.K. Metcalf. Rivera, what are you literally doing? You drafted a 165-pound corner. The criticism on him was if you have to face A.J. Brown, which you're going to have to do in this division twice a year, if you got to face D.K. Metcalf, which you're in the same conference as him, the analysis from basically everybody was don't let Emmanuel Forbes anywhere near those guys because he will just get bodied. It's like watching Nikola Jokic get matched up on a point guard. That's what we're talking about in some of these situations that they set Forbes up for last year. So, was he overdrafted according to a lot of people? Does he have issues? And even like, is he in the best scheme fit in terms of he was this off zone, high IQ, quarters happy cover corner in college. And that was kind of the Ron Rivera system that they drafted him to play. Now you're talking about a little bit more of a bump and run, cover one style system. It's not the best fit for Emmanuel Forbes. So he's going to be kind of behind the 8 ball in that regard, but he's got great speed. He's got great length. He has instincts. He gets his head around in phase. There's stuff to like about him. I'm not going to just give up on Forbes, but you also got to split the difference there, right? Like, it was a really bad rookie season. It wasn't just Metcalf and A.J. Brown dominating him. He had some other bad outings as well, and ultimately kind of got benched here. So he's the one player in this secondary where you're like, can he figure it out? Can he be an outside corner for you? I just don't know. The other thing is his run defense is hysterical. And you drafted him to put him in that off-zone system where he's out in space and doesn't have to get off blocks at the line of scrimmage as much. In this system, they're going to want him at the line of scrimmage. That's going to be a problem, right? Like, teams will be able to run to the edge if you've got Emmanuel Forbes as a starter in this system. So, I don't know. I'd almost be shopping him if I was the Commanders, just because they change systems and it's just not a fit for what he does. You know, does Arizona or one of these off-zone systems want to take a gamble on him for a third-round pick? I'd almost be more intrigued to do that, but we'll see where it goes with him. And then it's just, nothing you're counting on in terms of depth. James Pierce played for the Steelers, but nothing exciting. Classic backup type. Christian Holmes, late round drafted guy a couple years ago, hasn't emerged. Noah Igbenogany, no one's counting on him to do anything yet, but clearly Dan Quinn doesn't mind him. They traded for him in Dallas. Now he's following him to Washington. I mean, in this cornerback room, he might get an opportunity. He's got the traits. He was a very young, highly drafted player for Miami, so maybe, right? Then Kyu Blu Kelly, he ended up on 3 teams in his rookie season last year. He was a name that people liked. It's about all I can say about him. I wasn't a fan of him. Wasn't surprised he went in the 5th round, and wasn't really surprised he didn't stick. You got some other names in the mix as well, but it's a really rough outside cornerback room. Now, the slot corner room should be one of the best in the league. I mean, Mike Sainristil was basically the best thing you can say about him is he was good enough as a slot corner to warrant getting drafted in the 2nd round. We're going to see more of that with this being a starting position in the modern NFL, but it's still pretty rare that you see true slots go in the 2nd round, and he did, and no one really argued with it, right? Like, everyone kind of agreed, like, yeah, he's a 2nd round talent. He's got great instincts. He plays the run well. He's still newer to the position. I think that's, some of the anticipation and route recognition is still coming along, but he's super smart. I got high expectations for him, right? I think my pro comp on him was K'Wan Williams, and I think he can get there. Should have some learning curves because it's a really challenging position for a rookie to come in and play, but it was a good pick. But again, not going to be a dominant player out the gate, most likely, at least in terms of coverage. And then even the safety room, I believe in the safety room. I very much believe in the safety room, but it's entirely unproven. So, Derek Forrest had a huge 2022 season. This is a huge my guy in that draft class. It was, three drafts ago? He's heading into a contract year, which I love that for him. I would put him on my Commanders breakout list. Him and Jeremy Chin really could turn into, and Quan Martin as well. This could be, honestly, one of the best. I don't want to oversell this, but I don't want to undersell it either. I really think the potential is there for this to be one of the best safety rooms in the league pretty quickly. All hyper talented guys that fill the right roles. Derek Forrest has a ton of speed. He's got great ball skills on the back end. He's, to me, going to be the true free safety in this system. They love their single high. I think they'll keep him back there, and I love that as a fit for him, where he can use his range and his ball skills back there. He got hurt like week 5 last year and kind of missed the opportunity to follow up what was a mini breakout in year 2 for him. So I've got high expectations for him, but he's got to come out and prove it, right? He's still more in the interesting ascending player department than he is in the proven stud department. Then you've got Quan Martin. This will be interesting to see if my projection on this is correct. I think most of the depth chart predictions will have Jeremy Chin as the starting strong safety. And certainly if they go to typical base defenses, they might put Jeremy Chin out there instead of Quan Martin, but that's just not really how Dan Quinn's defense works. These three guys will be out there together quite a lot. This is very fascinating to me because Quan Martin was drafted in the second round last year. I thought he was a really talented player out of Illinois. Played a lot of slot at Illinois. Played a lot of slot in his rookie year for Washington when Ron Rivera was finally comfortable enough to put him out there. Again, he hates rookies. It was annoying. So it was like he could be a slot, but I actually really liked his projection to more of a deeper safety or a strong safety is like kind of ideal for him, where he could play single high, but keep him in a buzz, man him up on tight ends, can play a little slot wide receiver stuff. Like, it's a good spot for him, right? The question is here, with them drafting Mike Sainristil in the second round, the assumption would be we're kicking Quan Martin back to safety, and I really like that. If they just see him as a backup slot corner to Mike Sainristil, though, and they're not going to give him an opportunity, and Jeremy Chin is the other safety, and then it's Percy Butler in the safety room, because right now he's still listed as the nickel corner behind Mike Sainristil. Now, it's very early. I think that'll play out in time more like this, but it's going to be something to monitor, because I would be very critical of this front office and this coaching staff if they just gave up on Quan Martin after he played like 6 games last year, because Ron Rivera hates rookies. If they just gave up on him as a nickel corner and spent that second round pick on Mike Sainristil, right? So it'll be something to monitor, but I'm going to give this team the benefit of the doubt that this is how it's going to play out. And I'm excited for Quan Martin's upside, man. I thought he was a really explosive, versatile defensive back, well worth a second round pick last year. So I think the arrow's pointing up on him. And then we talked a good bit about Jeremy Chin already. Now you'll notice his coverage grade drops when we list him as a safety, or at least as a part of the secondary, because to me, his coverage impact is much more on the linebacker room if he's used the way I'm projecting him. When Carolina asked him to play deep safety, he had tighter hips in his transitions. He lacked anticipation, didn't always have the best ball skills or ability to process stuff, kind of reading the quarterback top down and all that stuff. So, it is worth noting. Like, I think there's a reason he didn't continue his success in Carolina when he was asked to be a deep safety. That's not really his game. I think we've got a good idea of what Dan Quinn sees in these guys and how they'll be used. But there's a world where they put Quan Martin on the bench behind Mike Sainristil, use Jeremy Chin as a true safety, and don't get the most out of this group. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Again, I'm projecting it this way, expecting this is how Dan Quinn's going to use these guys. But sometimes staff, like NFL staff members, just do weird stuff. So it's more of just an interesting conversation in terms of how these guys should be used, and then we'll see if they do it correctly. But that's the group. That whole combination, if you put Sainristil kind of in the group with the sort of like spine of the secondary, dude, like these guys are unproven. God, they could be freaking fun, man. I like Sainristil a lot. Forrest, Martin, Chin. These guys could be, like, this could be a legitimate strength of this defense. That wasn't necessarily a strength of Dan Quinn's defense in Dallas, too. So very excited for this group. Just they have to prove that they can be that, right? In terms of safety depth, Percy Butler's fine. He's got speed. Missed a ton of tackles last year. Not a ton of coverage instincts. But as a backup, it's whatever. I just hope they don't play him over Quan Martin. Jeremy Reeves, more of a special team impact. They draft Hampton in the 5th round out of Washington. Very balanced, bigger-bodied guy. I think he could really step in any of these safety roles. He's got the size, actually, to be a Jeremy Chin backup for the dime linebacker. Can go free safety, as he did at Washington. Can go strong safety. Just maybe doesn't thrive in any one department, but a very nice backup to have. And then I put the eyes next to Tyler Owens, just because we didn't get to see him finish his 40 at the combine. They thought he might run in the 4.2s. He's more of a, like, put him on special teams, give Dan Quinn 2 years to work with this dude, but I mean, his traits are insane. He just sucks at safety. So you don't want him on the field now, but someone to keep an eye on like deep down the road. They weren't going to repair this entire defense in one offseason, and that outside corner room is very tough to look at right now. I think teams will pick on that group. But again, I just can't reiterate enough how excited I am to see the potential for this safety and slot group. Overall, it's a C- secondary for me towards the bottom. And then they do come in very good in terms of run support. There's really not a weakness here, but none of these guys are like heavy impacts against the run, really, until Mike Sainer still proves that he can be that dude in the NFL. I think he'll come in good with a chance to be great pretty quick. So a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball overall than for offense, but they still come in 28th because it's just such an unproven group. I mean, secondary matters a lot, and they've got questions there, to say the least. Pass rush matters a lot. I don't know what they're getting from that edge group. Still a lot to prove in terms of linebacker coverage as well and how they're going to use these guys overall. Honestly, the coaching's doing a fair share of heavy lifting for a roster that is otherwise really abysmal. In terms of run defense, though, I think they have the pieces to be pretty solid up front, especially when you look at how these guys are going to be flying in from the back end with the linebackers in the secondary. And I think if they find a way to get creative with Luvu up front, he could really help that D-line too. So they do come in 14th for run defense, but 30th for pass defense. Overall, 28th for me in terms of this Commanders defense out the gate. Certainly potential there, though, for this to well exceed that, right? But then this is fun. This is new for this year. I wanted to do a little bit better, more thorough analysis for special teams. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I do want to show how they came out for special teams. And I wanted to come up with a formula that can at least project the special teams a little bit better, hopefully. In general, it still just doesn't carry a lot of weight for the overall team ranking because special teams is very year to year. It's very unpredictable. But I wanted to try to do my best by capturing some metrics here and kind of putting together a formula. So we've got, we're taking the PFF special teams grade, which factors in kick coverage and long snapper and all of it. The DVOA, which does the same. It's just a different site doing the work. And then we're taking the 2-year moving average of the kicker, the 2-year average of the punter, and then factoring in my sort of overall coach and culture benefit of the doubt slider to all spit out a special teams ranking for these teams. And unfortunately for Washington, in what is pretty much objective numbers, with the exception of the coach and culture, which is more of my opinion on where these organizations are at. But unfortunately, it's not a great outlook for the Commanders in terms of special teams. They were really poor last year, pretty much towards the bottom in any way you want to slice it. Now, they did bring in a new kicker. Brendan McManus is going to replace their guy Sly from last year. So it should be a minor upgrade there. But then Tress Way, once upon a time, a really good punter, but the last couple of years, he has been really, obviously the worst punter in football, according to PFF, the last couple of years. So, I think it's the hang time and his distance on his punts has gone way down. So might be time to look for a changing of the guard with the punter in Washington. But time to wrap everything up here. Looking back at the team splits one more time, pretty much just like C+ across the board here. They have filled out a lot of their holes with free agent Band-Aids, and, I like the staff additions, but it's just so many moving pieces. You can't really rank too many parts of this team as legitimate strengths, as legitimate, like, this is our identity, this is what we're going to dictate to you. It's just this kind of motley crew collection of talent, and they're figuring a lot out. And a lot of young players that have a lot to prove. It's, this is an exercise where we're not giving any one team benefit of the doubt. And when you have this many question marks and this many areas for improvement, it's not a huge surprise that Washington came in dead last, but it shouldn't be a surprise either if they figure some of this stuff as the year goes on and they finish maybe as more of the 25th best team in the league and have some fun moments late in the year, especially if Daniels looks good. But let's touch on their strengths and weaknesses one last time, and then we'll look at their schedule. For me, I wrote down for their strengths. There's not a lot of them, but I think the impact that they're going to get from Jaden Daniels on the run game, they get that force multiplying effect and a dynamic runner there. That's going to matter for them. I think the defensive coaching is a major strength for them. Really excited to see how Dan Quinn kind of uses these pieces, a lot of different chess pieces with this group. And then interior D-line is still a strength, though they don't really have a true game record at this point. You know, they don't have a Quinnen Williams or a, Chris Jones or something like that. They just have a couple of, really good pieces. And then the weaknesses and questions just kind of speak for themselves. It's pretty much everything else. It's pretty well documented at this point. But it's a lot, man. They got a lot of stuff to figure out. But let's look at their schedule and their over-under and kind of what the projection has them spitting out as here. I will admit their schedule's not horrible. They have that last place schedule, which is a benefit. They get to play the Giants twice, which is nice. Get teams like Carolina, Tennessee, Chicago, even Atlanta at home, Pittsburgh. They'll be within striking distance of those teams. They'll even be favored in, I think, a few games there. On the road, maybe not as friendly. Pretty much all capable teams with the exception of the Giants. And we'll see what the Cardinals and Saints look like this year. But a lot of playoff caliber teams there. So you're hoping home games can be a little more favorable for them this year with how the opponents break down. I know when you're watching this, the schedule will have released, but I'm recording this here before the schedule release. So moving forward, we'll have the actual schedule. But for this one, that's how we had to do it. They're over under 6.5 wins. The projection has them at 6.6, so kind of on the money. They do have some very winnable games at home. I'll say that. I don't think this team's going to suck. I think a lot of years we rank teams 32nd, and it's like, this team's tanking. This team has a bunch of holes. They're just, trotting out atrocious quarterback play, and their coaching's going to suck, and they have no direction. I don't think that that's this Commanders team. I will not be the least bit surprised if the Commanders hold the 6th pick in next year's draft and build some stuff into next year, but I do think week 1, they just have so much to prove, right? So that's where they come in. I'm obviously not betting this team to win the division. I'm not betting this team to win the Super Bowl, ranking them last year. I wouldn't even bet the over there, even if the projection has it slightly over. But, do I see this team getting to 7 wins? No, I don't. I think they're ultimately probably more of a 5-win team if I had to bet on it. But that's it. That's going to do it. That's in brackets there. That's it. 2-hour breakdown of the Washington Commanders here. That's what this series is all about, man. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Definitely let me know your comments down below if you think 32 is too harsh on this team. Someone had to come in last, right? Doesn't mean I hate this team. Doesn't mean I hate the direction they're going in, but a lot of questions. So let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said at the top of the video, if you could please hit that like button. If you're still here 2 hours in, you haven't hit that like button, with all due respect, what are you doing? It really helps me out. I just really appreciate it. A lot goes into this series, and that like would really help. So on the way out here, if you could, just smash that thumbs up for us. All right, we're getting loopy at the end of the first deep dive here, but that's going to do it. These usually take 3 or 4 days of production to get to the next one. So, we'll see you hopefully within the week for our next team. But until then, thank you for watching. Peace out.